In the scorching, isolated landscape of the Sonoran Desert, Lieutenant Commander Valkyrie Jensen sought peace. On leave from the high-stakes world of Navy SEAL operations, she aimed only for the quiet duty of visiting her ailing grandfather in the forgotten speck of a town called Redemption. But when she pulled her meticulously restored classic Mustang into a desolate roadside gas station, she crossed into territory ruled by the predatory Desert Vipers MC. They saw a woman alone, a flashy car ripe for the picking, and mistook her for easy prey. What the territorial bikers didn't know was that Maya wasn't just any woman. She was a Tier 1 operator, forged in the crucible of modern warfare, possessing skills they couldn't begin to comprehend. What began as roadside harassment and crude intimidation was about to ignite into a desperate battle for survival under the relentless Arizona sun. This chance encounter would unravel the Viper's iron grip on their dusty domain and force a lone warrior to unleash her carefully contained fury, proving that even in the most remote corners of the world, danger finds those trained for war. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Part 1. The stillness before the storm. The heat wasn't like the humid, oppressive blanket of Coronado or the sticky warmth of a jungle deployment. This was a dry, relentless heat. It baked the cracked earth, shimmered off the asphalt ribbon stretching towards an indifferent horizon, and drew every drop of moisture from your skin before you even realized you were sweating. Lieutenant Commander Valkyrie Jensen felt it leach the tension from her shoulders, a welcome change from the coiled readiness that had become her default state for the better part of 15 years. She was on leave. Real, honest-to-God leave, not the hurried weekend passes squeezed between training cycles or the mandatory downtime post-deployment that always felt more like administrative processing than actual rest. This time, it was different. Her grandfather, Silas, wasn't just old, he was fading. His sprawling, dusty ranch outside the forgotten speck of a town called Redemption, Arizona was where she'd spent childhood summers learning to ride horses, fix fences, and shoot straight, skills surprisingly transferable to her later career, albeit with significantly higher stakes. Now, Redemption called her back not for nostalgia, but for duty of a different kind. Her ride wasn't standard Navy issue. It was a meticulously restored 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1, candy apple red, a beast she'd poured countless off-duty hours and a significant chunk of her salary into. It growled contentedly on the deserted highway, a stark contrast to the quiet whir of specialized insertion craft or the deafening roar of helicopter rotors. She wore faded jeans, worn leather boots, and a simple gray t-shirt that did little to hide the lean, corded muscle sculpted by years of relentless training. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and aviator sunglasses shielded eyes that missed nothing, eyes trained to spot anomalies, assess threats, and calculate trajectories in fractions of a second. Right now, they were just enjoying the vast, empty beauty of the Sonoran Desert. Redemption wasn't much more than a wide spot in the road, a gas station that doubled as a general store, a dusty diner promising world-famous, locally, perhaps, chili, a feed store, a boarded-up motel, and a scattering of weathered houses clinging stubbornly to life. It existed in a pocket of the world where cell service was a myth and the nearest town of any consequence was over an hour away. Perfect for Silas, who valued solitude. Perfect, Maya thought, for finally, truly switching off. The Mustang's fuel gauge nudged towards empty. The last gas for 70 miles sign confirmed the inevitable pit stop. She pulled into the gravel lot of the Oasis Gas and Grub, the only sign of life a beat-up pickup truck parked near the dusty pumps and the lazy hum of a window air conditioning unit protruding from the diner's side wall. She killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the buzz of unseen insects and the distant cry of a hawk. Swinging her legs out, she felt the familiar scan kick in automatically, assessing exits, potential cover, the occupants of the pickup empty, the state of the building old but functional. Habits died hard. She shook her head, forcing the tactical overlay to recede. You're on leave, Maya. Pump gas. Maybe grab a cold drink. Inside, the air was blessedly cool, thick with the smell of stale coffee, frying onions, and disinfectant. A plump woman with tired eyes and hair netted tightly stood behind a Formica counter, wiping it down with methodical slowness. A couple of old-timers occupied a booth by the window, nursing coffee cups and engaged in a low, rumbling conversation. Maya gave a slight nod to the woman, grabbing a bottle of water from a cooler buzzing loudly in the corner. "Just need to fill up," Maya said, her voice calm and low. "Pump 3's the good one," the woman replied without looking up. "Pay inside." Maya headed back out into the searing heat. As she unscrewed the gas cap, the sound reached her, a low, guttural rumble that steadily grew louder. It wasn't the sound of a single vehicle, but several. Harleys. Big ones. She didn't turn immediately. Instead, she started the pump, her ears tracking the approaching sound, analyzing it. 4, maybe 5 bikes. Moving fast. Not professionals, their engine sounds weren't perfectly synchronized, a ragged edge to the roar. But they rode with an aggressive confidence that spoke of familiarity with these roads and perhaps impunity. They roared into the lot, a cloud of dust billowing behind them, chrome glinting painfully in the midday sun. 5 bikes, 5 riders. They wore leather cuts adorned with patches, a coiled rattlesnake bearing its fangs, encircling the words Desert Vipers MC. They parked haphazardly, blocking the entrance and effectively boxing her Mustang in against the pumps. Maya kept pumping gas, her posture relaxed, but every sense was on high alert. She noted their appearances: grizzled, sunburnt, hard-looking men. The apparent leader, parked closest to her, was barrel-chested with a thick gray beard stained yellow around the mouth, a faded skull tattoo peeking from beneath his sleeve, and eyes like chips of flint that immediately fixed on her, then lingered, with predatory assessment on the sleek lines of the Mach 1. Well, the leader rumbled, swinging a thick leg over his bike. His voice was gravelly, used to shouting over engine noise. "Look what the cat dragged in. Ain't seen a beauty like that round here before." He was looking at the car, but his eyes kept flicking back to Maya. Maya ignored him, focusing on the numbers clicking over on the pump. De-escalation 101. Don't engage unless necessary. Show no fear, offer no provocation. Another biker, younger, wiry, with nervous eyes and a missing front tooth, snickered. "Nice ride, sweetheart. Musta cost a pretty penny. Daddy buy it for ya?" The leader shot him a look that shut him up instantly. He sauntered closer, his worn boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed over his leather-clad chest. The smell of stale beer, sweat, and engine oil rolled off him. "Name's Razor," he said, his gaze unwavering. "President of the Desert Vipers. This is our stretch of road." It wasn't a greeting, it was a statement of ownership. Maya finished pumping, replaced the nozzle, and screwed the gas cap back on, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She finally turned to face him, pushing her sunglasses up slightly. "Just passing through," she said, her voice even, betraying no emotion. Razor's lips twisted into something that might have been a smile but held no warmth. "Passing through, huh? In a car like that? Seems kinda conspicuous for just passing through redemption." He took another step closer, invading her personal space. "Maybe you got lost?" Behind him, the other Vipers chuckled, shifting their weight, creating a semicircle that subtly hemmed her in. They weren't overtly threatening yet, but the air crackled with implied menace. Maya could feel the familiar adrenaline beginning to seep into her system, sharpening her focus, tightening her muscles. "I know exactly where I am," Maya replied, holding his gaze. She didn't back down, didn't shrink away from his proximity. She stood her ground, projecting a quiet confidence that seemed to momentarily surprise him. Years of facing down hardened men in far more dangerous situations had taught her the power of presence. Razor tilted his head, studying her more closely. He saw the way she stood, balanced, ready. He saw the lack of fear in her eyes. This wasn't the usual intimidated tourist or frightened local. "Feisty," he grunted, a flicker of something else, annoyance, in his eyes. "I like feisty." He gestured towards the Mustang. "That's a lot of car for a little lady." "It gets me where I need to go," Maya said curtly. She needed to pay and leave. The longer this interaction continued, the higher the chances of it escalating. "Maybe you need someone to show you around," Razor persisted, his tone becoming suggestive. "Make sure you don't get lost again." One of the bikers behind him, a lanky man with greasy hair and cruel eyes, reached out and ran a grimy hand along the polished fender of the Mustang. "Real nice paint job," he sneered. "Be a shame if something happened to it." That crossed a line. It wasn't just verbal anymore. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. Her gaze flicked to the hand on her car, then back to Razor. I'd appreciate it if your friend kept his hands off my property, she said, her voice dropping half an octave, losing its casual tone, replaced by a hint of steel. The lanky biker grinned, deliberately smearing his dirty hand across the paint. Or what? Razor watched Maya's reaction, a calculating look in his eyes. He was testing her, probing for weakness, enjoying the power dynamic. Maya took a slow breath, centering herself. She could feel the eyes of the old-timers in the diner watching through the window, the woman behind the counter frozen in place. This was escalating exactly as she'd feared. She needed to end it quickly and decisively, but without revealing the full extent of her capabilities if possible. That could make things exponentially worse. Or, Maya said, turning her body slightly, angling herself towards the lanky biker but keeping Razor in her peripheral vision, you'll need a new set of knuckles. The air thickened. The lanky biker scoffed, taking a step towards her, puffing out his chest. You threatening me, bitch? Razor didn't intervene this time. He just watched, a predatory stillness about him. He wanted to see what she would do. Maya didn't reply verbally. The biker swung a clumsy, telegraphed right hook aimed at her head. Time seemed to slow down, just as it always did. Maya moved with liquid speed honed by thousands of hours of CQC training. She didn't dodge backward, she moved in, slipping under the arc of the punch. Her left hand shot out, deflecting his forearm upwards while her right hand simultaneously struck the pressure point cluster at his brachial plexus, just below the collarbone. It wasn't a full-force blow, just a sharp, targeted impact. The biker grunted, his arm going numb and useless. His eyes widened in shock and pain. Before he could react further, Maya pivoted smoothly on the ball of her foot. Her right hand clamped onto his wrist, twisting it sharply in an S-lock while her left forearm pressed firmly against the back of his triceps. Using his own momentum and body mechanics against him, she drove him forward and down, face first, into the dusty gravel. It was fast, efficient, and brutally effective, executed with the dispassionate precision of long practice. He landed with a surprised oof, spitting dirt. Silence descended again, heavier this time. The other three vipers froze, stunned by the sudden, unexpected violence and the sheer speed of the takedown. The lanky biker groaned on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Razor's eyes, however, narrowed with a new kind of intensity. The amusement was gone, replaced by a cold, dangerous calculation. He hadn't expected that. Not at all. Well, now, Razor said slowly, his voice dangerously soft. Looks like the little lady has claws. He took a deliberate step back, creating space, his hand subtly drifting towards the heavy belt buckle at his waist. Seems we underestimated you. Maya straightened up, her stance balanced, her eyes sweeping over the remaining four bikers, assessing their positions, their potential threat levels. Razor was the clear danger, the center of gravity. The other three were followers, shock still registering on their faces, but anger quickly replacing it. They started to spread out, flanking her. She was still boxed in. Her car was vulnerable, and she was outnumbered. The odds weren't great, but they'd been worse. Much worse. I just want to pay for my gas and leave, Maya stated, her voice calm but hard. This doesn't need to go any further. Razor chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, I think it does. You assaulted one of my men. Disrespected the vipers. That requires compensation. His gaze flicked meaningfully towards the Mustang again, then back to her, lingering with an unpleasant implication. We'll figure out the terms. The situation had crossed a threshold. De-escalation had failed. Avoidance was no longer an option. The Desert Vipers, used to ruling their desolate patch of highway through intimidation and violence, had just poked a hornet's nest. They just didn't know yet that the hornet was, in fact, a Valkyrie. And Maya knew with a sinking certainty that settled cold and hard in her gut that her leave was officially over. The desert wasn't offering peace today. It was demanding a price. Maya is surrounded, the leader indicating things will escalate further. Her initial, decisive action has revealed she's capable, but has also enraged the bikers and locked her into conflict. Part 2, Echoes and Escalation. The standoff hung heavy in the scorching air. The biker Maya had taken down pushed himself up slowly, cradling his arm, his face contorted in pain and fury. She broke my damn arm, Razor. Razor didn't spare him a glance. His focus was entirely on Maya. He saw the way she stood, not like a cornered animal, but like a predator assessing its options. He saw the controlled breathing, the constant subtle shifts in her gaze as she tracked each of them. This wasn't random luck or a lucky shot. This was training. Pick up Snake, Razor ordered curtly to the wiry biker with the missing tooth. Take him to docks later. Right now. He let the sentence hang, his eyes locking with Maya's. We have unfinished business. Maya calculated rapidly. For opponents likely armed with knives, maybe chains or improvised weapons. Razor probably had a firearm accessible, judging by his posture and hand placement near his belt. Her own weapon was locked in a compartment in the Mustang, standard procedure when traveling stateside on leave, but damnably inconvenient right now. Getting to it was impossible. Her best assets were surprise, now partially compromised, her skills, and the environment. The gas pumps offered minimal cover. The diner, potential hostages, confined space, not ideal. Her car blocked in. Look, Maya tried again, keeping her voice level, projecting calm she didn't entirely feel. The adrenaline was a familiar friend, but this situation was messy, uncontrolled. This is a misunderstanding. Your friend touched my car after I asked him not to. He swung first. Let me pay for the gas and I'm gone. No police, no trouble. Razor laughed, a harsh bark that echoed in the stillness. You think you're in a position to dictate terms? You come onto our turf, assault one of my club. He spat on the ground near her boot. There's a tax for that kind of disrespect. The wiry biker, Weasel, helped the injured Snake limp towards one of the bikes. The remaining two bikers, burly figures Maya mentally tagged as Tank and Grime, moved slowly, deliberately, widening their circle, cutting off any easy escape route back towards the highway. What do you want? Maya asked, stalling for time, analyzing the terrain behind her. Open desert stretched beyond the gas station perimeter, dotted with sparse creosote bushes and deceptive washes, potential but risky. First, Razor said, nodding towards the Mustang, the keys to your pretty car. As a down payment. His eyes glinted. Then, we'll have a little chat. Get to know each other better. The implication was chillingly clear. Maya's jaw tightened. Handing over the keys wasn't just about the car, it was about surrender, about placing herself entirely at their mercy. That wasn't going to happen. Not happening, she stated flatly. Razor sighed dramatically. See? Feisty. Didn't want to have to damage that nice paint job. He gave a subtle nod to Tank. Tank, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, grinned maliciously and started walking towards the Mustang. He pulled a heavy chain from a loop on his belt, the links clinking ominously. Maya knew she had only seconds. Direct confrontation against all four was suicide. Evasion was key. Her eyes darted to the side of the gas station building. A narrow gap, maybe 3 feet wide, separated it from a rusted propane tank enclosure. Beyond that lay the open desert, rough terrain, but space to maneuver. Decision made. As Tank raised the chain, aiming for the Mustang's windshield, Maya exploded into motion. She didn't run at them, she feinted left, towards Grime, drawing his attention, then pivoted sharply right, sprinting for the gap beside the building. Get her! Razor roared, startled by her speed. Grime lunged, grabbing for her arm, but Maya was already past him, her seal-drilled agility carrying her forward. Weasel, momentarily distracted by Snake's groaning, fumbled but was too slow. Tank, surprised, hesitated for a crucial second, the chain swinging harmlessly through the air where Maya had been standing. Razor reacted instantly, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from under his leather vest. He didn't aim carefully, he snapped off a shot in her general direction. The crack of the gunshot was shockingly loud, echoing off the flat desert landscape. A chip of concrete exploded from the corner of the building inches from Maya's head as she dove into the narrow gap. She hit the ground, rolled, and came up moving, scrambling through the tight space. Dust, cobwebs, and the smell of stale grease assaulted her senses. She burst out the other side, momentarily disoriented by the transition from shadow back into blinding sunlight. The open desert stretched before her. Rough, uneven ground dotted with spiky vegetation and loose rocks. Not ideal for running, but better than being cornered. Another gunshot cracked, closer this time. Razor was rounding the corner, his face a mask of fury. Weasel and Grime were right behind him. Tank, abandoning the car for the moment, lumbered after them. Maya didn't hesitate. She sprinted, not in a straight line, but weaving, using the sparse bushes as momentary visual cover. Her boots pounded the hard-packed earth, kicking up puffs of dust. The heat was a physical blow, but her conditioning kicked in. Her breathing remained controlled, her strides efficient. She risked a glance back. They were pursuing on foot for now. The bikes wouldn't handle this terrain well. Razor fired again, wildly. He wasn't a marksman, just angry. But stray bullets were still lethal. She needed distance and cover. Ahead, maybe 50 yards, the ground dipped into a shallow arroyo, a dry wash carved by long-forgotten flash floods. It offered concealment, but also the risk of ambush if they anticipated her move. No choice. She poured on speed, ignoring the stinging scratches from thorny branches, the jarring impact on her ankles. She reached the lip of the wash and half-jumped, half-slid down the loose, sandy bank, landing in a crouch at the bottom. The wash was maybe 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep, its sandy bottom littered with sun-bleached rocks and desiccated animal bones. It snaked away into the desert, offering a concealed path, at least for a while. She immediately pressed herself against the near bank, listening intently. Above her, she heard their heavy breathing, their curses as they reached the edge of the wash. Where'd she go? Weasel's voice, high-pitched with adrenaline. Down here, you idiot. Razor snarled. Spread out. She can't have gone far. Tank, stay up top, watch the edges. Grime, Weasel, with me. Maya heard them sliding down the bank further along the wash. They were coming. She moved quickly, silently, deeper into the arroyo, her boots making minimal sound on the soft sand. Every sense was heightened. The smell of dust and creosote, the buzz of flies, the pounding of her own heart. Images flashed through her mind, nighttime insertions in hostile territory, evading patrols in Afghan mountains, the faces of her teammates. This was different, yet chillingly familiar. Lone operative, hostile environment, pursuers. The wash twisted, turned. She rounded a bend and saw her chance. A dense thicket of mesquite had taken root on one bank, its thorny branches creating a dark, tangled screen that reached down almost to the wash floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was concealment. She slipped into the shadows beneath the mesquite, pressing herself flat against the sandy bank, pulling dead branches loosely around her for added camouflage. She controlled her breathing, slowing it down, minimizing movement. She became part of the landscape, waiting, listening. Minutes stretched into an eternity, marked only by the relentless sun beating down and the distant shouts of the bikers. See anything? Razor's voice, closer now. Nothing but sand and lizards, Grime grumbled back. Maybe she doubled back? No. She went this way. Keep moving. Maya heard their footsteps crunching in the sand, moving past her position. 2 sets of boots. Razor and Grime. Weasel must have hung back or perhaps gone the other direction at a fork she hadn't noticed. They passed her hiding spot. She remained absolutely still, every muscle taut. She could smell Razor's stale beer scent even from 10 feet away. She saw the butt of his revolver tucked into his waistband. Grime carried a nasty-looking Bowie knife strapped to his thigh. They continued down the wash, their voices fading slightly. But they hadn't gone far. Maya knew this wasn't over. They were angry, humiliated, and wouldn't give up easily. They knew the territory, she didn't. She had skills, but limited resources. No comms, no backup, no weapon beyond her own body and wits. Her Mustang, her only way out, was back at the gas station, likely being vandalized or worse. And her grandfather. Silas was miles away, unaware of the danger she was in. She needed to get back, somehow. She carefully extricated herself from the mesquite thorns, scanning the wash in both directions. Empty for now. She had a choice, continue down the wash, hoping to eventually circle back towards the highway away from the gas station, or try to climb out and make her way overland. Overland offered better visibility but zero cover. The wash offered concealment but limited escape routes and the constant risk of ambush. She decided to stick with the wash for now, moving cautiously in the direction the bikers had gone. Maybe she could circle around them, put distance between them. She moved with practiced silence, scanning the banks above, listening for any sound. Rounding another bend, she froze. Ahead, partially obscured by another tangle of brush, was Weasel. He wasn't looking down the wash, he was trying to scramble up the steep bank, probably to get a better vantage point or link up with Tank. He was struggling, his boots slipping on the loose soil. An opportunity. One less pursuer. Maya closed the distance rapidly, silently. Weasel was concentrating on his climb, grunting with effort. She reached the base of the bank just as he found a firmer handhold. With swift, economical motion, Maya grabbed his ankles and yanked hard. Weasel yelped in surprise, his hold breaking. He tumbled backward down the bank, landing in a heap at the bottom with a painful thud, the air rushing out of his lungs. Before he could recover or shout, Maya was on him. Her knee pinned his chest, her left forearm pressed hard against his throat, cutting off his air. Her right hand swiftly relieved him of the small, cheap automatic pistol tucked into his waistband. It felt reassuringly solid in her hand, though she had no idea if it was loaded or functional. Weasel's eyes bulged with terror and lack of oxygen. He clawed weakly at her arm. "Don't make a sound," Maya whispered, her voice a deadly hiss inches from his face. She eased the pressure slightly, allowing him a ragged gasp of air. "Where's the other one? The big guy?" Weasel, panicked and gasping, just shook his head frantically. "Tank. The one who stayed topside." Maya pressed her forearm harder. "Where is he?" "Dunno, other side, watching the wash." Weasel choked out. "How many rounds in this?" Maya demanded, shaking the pistol slightly. 6, maybe 5, loaded it last week." "Good enough." She needed him silenced and immobilized quickly. She didn't want to kill him if she didn't have to, but she couldn't leave him to raise the alarm. She shifted her weight, maintaining control, and used her free hand to rip a strip of cloth from the bottom of Weasel's own dirty t-shirt. She quickly, expertly gagged him, pulling it tight. Then, using his own belt, she bound his hands securely behind his back. Another strip of cloth served to hobble his ankles. He was neutralized, trussed up like a chicken, fear radiating from him. She dragged him deeper into the shade of the brush, out of sight from the main wash channel. "If you make noise, if you try to get loose," Maya whispered menacingly, "I'll hear you. And I'll be back." She tapped the pistol against his cheek for emphasis. His eyes widened further. 1 down, 3 to go. But now she had a firearm, albeit of dubious quality. And she knew Tank was somewhere above, potentially watching. Razor and Grime were still somewhere down the wash. She was still in the kill box. She checked the pistol quickly. A cheap .380 automatic. She ejected the magazine, 4 rounds, plus potentially 1 in the chamber. Better than nothing. She chambered a round, feeling the slide click into place, then flicked the safety on. She peered cautiously out from the brush. The wash ahead was empty. The sun beat down mercilessly. She listened. Faintly, from further down the wash, she heard Razor shouting, his voice echoing slightly. "Weasel? Report." Silence. "Weasel? Damn it, answer me." More silence. Then an angry bellow, "Grime. With me. Something's wrong." They knew. They'd be coming back, fast and alert. And Tank was still somewhere above. Maya gripped the unfamiliar pistol, the cool metal a stark contrast to the desert heat. She had seconds to decide her next move. Go deeper? Climb out now? Set an ambush? The hunter was becoming the hunted, but the hunted now had teeth. Maya has neutralized 1 biker and acquired a weapon, but the remaining bikers are alerted and closing in. Tank is still an unknown threat from above. Her tactical situation has improved but remains perilous. Part 3. Desert Gambit. The shouts grew closer. Razor and Grime were backtracking, moving with purpose now, suspicion hardening their anger into dangerous focus. Maya knew staying in the wash was becoming untenable. Tank, positioned somewhere above, had the tactical advantage of high ground. If he spotted her, she'd be trapped between fire from above and the 2 advancing bikers. She scanned the opposite bank of the arroyo. It was steep, almost sheer in places, baked hard by the sun. But about 20 yards back the way she'd come, a cluster of weathered sandstone rocks offered potential handholds, a scramble route out of the wash and onto the relatively flatter desert floor above. It was exposed, but it was her best chance to break contact and regain the initiative. Move now. She holster-tucked the .380 into the waistband of her jeans at the small of her back, the rough metal scraping against her skin. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she broke cover and sprinted back along the sandy bottom, heading for the rocks. Her movements were fluid, practiced, keeping low, minimizing her target profile. She reached the rocks just as Razor and Grime rounded the bend where she'd ambushed Weasel. They spotted her immediately. "There!" Razor yelled, raising his revolver. Maya didn't hesitate. She launched herself at the rock face, finding purchase with hands and feet, scrambling upwards with the speed and agility of a seasoned climber. Loose pebbles skittered down behind her. A shot cracked from below, whining past her head, striking sparks off the rock face near her hand. Razor wasn't accounting for the upward angle or her speed. Another shot followed, equally wild. She clawed her way higher, adrenaline singing in her veins. The sandstone was hot, abrasive against her palms. She reached a small ledge, halfway up, paused for a fraction of a second to glance down. Razor and Grime were at the base, firing upwards. Grime had his Bowie knife out, uselessly gesturing. Then, movement above. Tank. He appeared at the lip of the wash directly above her, peering down, his massive frame silhouetted against the blinding sky. He held a length of heavy pipe like a club. He'd pinpointed her position. Trapped. Fire from below, threat from above. Instinct took over. She couldn't go up, couldn't go down. She launched herself sideways, traversing across the rock face, aiming for a scraggly Palo Verde tree clinging precariously to the cliff edge a few yards away. It was a desperate move, exposing her completely for a moment. Tank, surprised by the lateral movement, hefted the pipe, preparing to bring it down if she got closer. Below, Razor adjusted his aim. Now, while Tank was focused above and Razor below, Maya drew the .380 in one smooth motion. She didn't aim for a kill shot. She aimed for distraction, for disruption. Twisting her body, bracing against the rock, she fired twice towards the ground near Razor's feet. Pop! Pop! The small-caliber weapon sounded insignificant after the roar of Razor's revolver, but the bullets kicked up spurts of dust right by his boots. Razor flinched violently, stumbling back, momentarily losing his sight picture. Son of a... That was all she needed. Using the momentary distraction, Maya lunged the final few feet towards the Palo Verde. She grabbed a thick, sturdy branch, ignoring the thorns, and swung herself upwards, using her momentum and upper body strength to haul herself over the lip of the wash and onto the flat ground above. She landed in a crouch, pistol up, scanning frantically. Tank was only feet away, reacting slowly, surprised she'd made it past him. He raised the pipe, bellowing, and charged. Maya didn't have time for finesse. As Tank lumbered towards her, swinging the heavy pipe in a wide, overhead arc, she sidestepped sharply. The pipe crashed down where she'd been a split second before, striking the hard earth with a dull thud. Tank's momentum carried him slightly off balance. Maya exploded forward. She drove the heel of her palm hard into his exposed side, just below the rib cage, a liver shot. Tank gasped, the air driven from his lungs, his face paling. As he staggered, Maya snapped a vicious elbow strike to the side of his head. He dropped like a felled tree, the pipe clattering harmlessly beside him. He wasn't dead, but he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. 2 down, 2 to go. But Razor and Grime were already scrambling up the bank where she'd made her ascent, spurred on by the sounds of the brief fight. Maya didn't wait. She sprinted away from the edge of the wash, deeper into the desert. The terrain here was flatter but still treacherous, covered in loose rocks, spiky cholla cactus, and ankle-twisting holes hidden by sparse brush. Her Mustang felt 1,000,000 miles away. She needed a plan beyond just running. She needed to turn the tables, use the environment, use their mindset against them. They were bikers used to open roads, brute force, and intimidation. They weren't trained soldiers accustomed to tactical maneuvering in harsh terrain. She glanced back. Razor and Grime had cleared the wash. They were maybe 50 yards behind, gaining slightly. Razor still had his revolver. Grime had his knife. They were spreading out slightly, trying to flank her. Ahead, the ground began to slope downwards again, leading towards a cluster of large, weathered rock formations, granite outcrops carved by wind and time into bizarre shapes. Cover. Defensible positions. A place to make a stand or set a trap. She pushed herself harder, legs burning, lungs aching in the dry heat. She reached the first of the large boulders, ducking behind it, the cool stone a welcome shock against her heated skin. She risked a peek around the edge. Razor and Grime were approaching cautiously now, using the smaller rocks and bushes for cover, advancing in leapfrogs. They were learning, adapting. Maya scanned her surroundings. The rock formations created a natural maze of passages, shadows, and blind corners. Perfect for an ambush. But who was ambushing whom? She checked the .380 again. 2 rounds left in the magazine, possibly 1 in the chamber. 3 shots, max. Not enough for a sustained firefight. Razor likely had more ammunition for his revolver. She needed to make every shot count or find another way. An idea sparked, born from countless training scenarios. Misdirection. Psychological pressure. She moved deeper into the rock cluster, letting them see her disappear around a corner. She found a narrow crevice between two massive boulders barely wide enough to squeeze into. From here, she had a narrow field of view back the way she'd come, but she was well concealed. She listened. Heard their boots crunching on the gravelly soil, getting closer. Heard Razor's low, guttural commands. Check left. Grime, circle around that big one. They were splitting up, trying to flush her out. Perfect. Maya took one of the spent .380 casings she'd instinctively pocketed after firing earlier. Holding her breath, she tossed it high and arcing, aiming for it to land on the rocks about 20 yards away off to her right. The small brass cartridge clinked audibly against the stone in the otherwise silent landscape. What was that? Grime's voice, sharp with tension. Over there. Razor directed. Sounded like she dropped something. Go check it out. I'll cover. Maya heard Grime moving away towards the sound of the dropped casing. She waited, heart pounding. Razor would be holding position, watching the area where he thought Grime was heading and the last place he'd seen Maya. This was her chance. Razor was alone, focused elsewhere. She slipped silently from the crevice, pistol held ready in a two-handed grip, safety off. She moved like a ghost around the boulder, using the shadows, placing each footfall with practiced care. She rounded the edge and saw him. Razor was about 15 yards away, crouched behind a smaller rock, his revolver pointed towards the area where she'd thrown the casing. His back was partially turned to her. Maya raised the .380, aligning the crude sights on his center mass. She could end it right here. One shot. Years of training screamed at her to take the decisive action, eliminate the threat. But something held her back. The image of Silas, frail in his bed. The feeling of the desert sun, meant to be peaceful. This wasn't a combat zone. This man, repulsive as he was, wasn't an enemy combatant in the same sense. Killing him here, now, it felt different. Necessary, perhaps, but heavy. Her hesitation cost her. Razor must have sensed something, some sixth sense honed by a life of violence. He started to turn, his eyes widening as he saw her. His revolver swung around. Maya reacted instantly, abandoning the kill shot. She fired, aiming low. Pop! The bullet struck Razor in the thigh. He roared in pain and surprise, stumbling, his shot going wide, whistling harmlessly past Maya's ear. He clutched his leg, blood blooming dark against his dusty jeans. Before he could recover or fire again, Maya closed the distance, covering the 15 yards in a blur of motion. She kicked the revolver from his spasming hand, sending it skittering across the rocks. Razor snarled, ignoring the pain in his leg, and lunged at her, grabbing her gun arm with surprising strength. They crashed together, struggling fiercely amongst the rocks. He was strong, fueled by rage and adrenaline, outweighing her significantly. Her pistol was trapped between their bodies, useless. He shoved her back against a rough boulder face, the impact jarring her teeth. His breath, hot and foul, blasted her face. Gonna kill you, bitch, he growled, his hands clawing for her throat. Maya slammed her knee up into his already injured thigh. He howled, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Maya twisted violently, breaking his hold on her arm. She brought the butt of the small pistol down hard on the bridge of his nose. A sickening crunch echoed in the confined space. Razor staggered back, blood pouring from his shattered nose, his eyes glazing over. Maya didn't give him time to recover. She followed up with a rapid sequence of strikes, elbow to the jaw, palm heel to the temple. He crumpled, groaning, and collapsed onto the dusty ground, semi-conscious. Silence, save for Razor's ragged breathing and the distant sound of Grime still searching near where the casing had landed. Razor? What was that shot? You get her. Maya stood over Razor, breathing heavily, pistol still in hand. One round left. She quickly retrieved Razor's fallen revolver, a hefty .357 Magnum. 3 rounds spent, 3 remaining. Much better. She tucked the small .380 away, it had served its purpose. Grime's voice, closer now, laced with confusion and growing alarm. Razor? You okay? Maya scanned the area quickly. Razor was down, incapacitated. Weasel was tied up in the wash. Tank was unconscious near the wash edge. Only Grime remained. But he knew something was wrong. He'd be cautious now, dangerous. She couldn't stay here. She needed to keep moving, use the terrain. She looked back towards the gas station. Miles away, shimmering in the heat haze. Then she looked in the direction of Silas's ranch, even further, across rugged, unfamiliar territory. Grime appeared at the edge of the rock cluster, Bowie knife held ready, peering into the shadows, searching for his leader, searching for her. His eyes were narrowed, wary. Maya melted back into the labyrinth of rocks, the heavier .357 feeling solid and deadly in her hand. This deadly game of cat and mouse wasn't over yet. Grime was between her and any chance of escape. She had to go through him. Maya has incapacitated Razor and acquired a better weapon, but Grime is alerted, cautious, and stands between her and potential escape. The final confrontation looms. Part 4, Dust and Reckoning. The desert held its breath. The only sounds were the scuff of Maya's boots on stone as she moved deeper into the rock maze, Grime's cautious advance behind her, and the incessant buzz of insects oblivious to the human drama unfolding. Maya kept low, using the towering granite formations as cover, listening intently. Grime wasn't rushing, he was moving with a predator's patience now, checking corners, scanning shadows. He knew his backup was gone, knew he was likely facing the woman who had taken them down. Fear mingled with anger, making him unpredictable. Maya found a high point, a flat-topped boulder accessible via a narrow chimney-like fissure. From here, hidden in the deep afternoon shadow, she could overlook a small, open area within the rock cluster, a natural arena. If she could lure Grime into that space, she'd have the advantage of high ground and surprise. She waited, controlling her breathing, letting the silence stretch. She needed him to commit to enter the clearing. She could hear his footsteps, sometimes close, sometimes further away as he methodically searched the wrong passages. Then he emerged into the open space below her, moving cautiously, knife held low, eyes scanning the surrounding rocks. He paused, listening, head cocked. This was her chance. She could take the shot. The .357 felt heavy and sure in her hand. Aiming its center mass from this angle, maybe 20 feet above him, was straightforward. End it. Again, the hesitation. Not indecision, but a conscious choice. She hadn't killed Razor. She wouldn't kill this one either if she could possibly avoid it. Capture, incapacitate, that was the goal. Lethal force was the last resort, reserved for imminent threat to her life she couldn't otherwise neutralize. Was he that threat now? Not yet. She needed to draw him out, make him reveal his intentions more clearly. She dislodged a small pebble with the toe of her boot. It rattled down the rock face, landing near his feet. Grime jumped, whirling around, knife flashing in the sunlight that filtered into the clearing. "Show yourself," he yelled, his voice tight with tension. "Come on out. Let's finish this." He was edgy, ready to react violently to any movement. Maya remained hidden, watching him pace the small clearing, his eyes darting nervously towards every shadow. He was working himself up, talking to bolster his own courage. "Razor. Tank. Weasel. Bunch of useless bastards. Leaving me to deal with this crazy bitch." He spat on the ground. "Think you're tough? You ain't faced me yet." Maya used the time to assess him more closely. He was wiry but looked strong, moved with a low center of gravity. The knife was his primary weapon, and he held it like he knew how to use it. Getting into close quarters with him would be risky. She needed to separate him from the knife. An idea, risky but potentially effective, formed. She shifted position slightly, moving to the edge of the boulder overlooking the entrance to the clearing Grime had used. She waited until he paced back towards that side, his back momentarily turned to the spot where the pebble had fallen. Taking careful aim with the .357, she fired. Not at Grime, but at the rock face near the entrance, inches from his head. Boom! The roar of the magnum round was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off the rocks. Splinters of granite flew. Grime yelped, throwing himself flat on the ground instinctively, covering his head. The knife clattered from his grasp, sliding several feet away across the dusty earth. Before the echo died, Maya was moving. She slid down the fissure, landing lightly on the balls of her feet at the edge of the clearing. Grime was scrambling, trying to retrieve his knife, momentarily disoriented by the blast. "Looking for this?" Maya asked, her voice dangerously calm. Grime froze halfway to his knife. He looked up, saw her standing there, revolver steady in her hand, aimed directly at him. His face paled under the grime and sweat. "Drop it," Maya commanded, nodding towards the knife. "Kick it over here." Slowly. Panic warred with defiance in Grime's eyes. He glanced at the knife, then back at Maya, calculating his chances. They were zero. With a trembling hand, he reached down, picked up the Bowie knife, and gave it a hesitant shove with his boot. It skittered across the dirt, stopping a few feet from Maya. She kept the revolver trained on him. "On your stomach. Hands behind your head. Now." Grime hesitated for a split second, then complied, lowering himself slowly onto the ground, the fight draining out of him. He laced his fingers behind his head, his face pressed into the dust. Maya cautiously approached, keeping the gun aimed, her eyes never leaving him. She kicked the knife further away, out of reach. She retrieved a length of cordage she always carried looped on her belt. Lightweight, high tensile strength, useful for 1,000 things, including improvised restraints. Working quickly, efficiently, she bound Grimes' hands securely behind his back, then his ankles. She checked the knots, non-slip, tight. He wasn't going anywhere. 3 down. All neutralized without lethal force, the Razor and Tank would need medical attention eventually. She stood up, holstering the revolver, feeling the immense wave of adrenaline begin to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. She looked around the small clearing, at the bound biker at her feet, the discarded knife, the scorch mark on the rock from the .357 round. The silence returned, profound now, broken only by Grimes' ragged breathing. She needed to get back. First, check on Weasel and Tank. Then retrieve her Mustang if possible. And contact authorities. Not local if she could help it. The Vipers seemed too comfortable here. The possibility of local law enforcement being complacent or compromised was too high. She'd need to find a way to contact her own chain of command or a federal agency. First things first. She scanned the area around Grime, finding his bike keys and a cheap burner phone in his pockets. The phone was old, low battery, but might be useful. She took both. She made her way back towards the wash, moving more carefully now, conserving energy. The sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The heat was lessening, but the ordeal was far from over. She found Tank where she'd left him, still unconscious but breathing steadily. His pulse was strong. He'd have a monster headache, but he'd live. She left him, heading back into the wash. Weasel was still trussed up where she'd hidden him, eyes wide with fear when she approached. He hadn't made a sound. She checked his bonds, then left him too. They were secure, unable to warn anyone or cause more trouble for now. Finally, she returned to where Razor lay amongst the rocks. He was conscious now, groaning, trying futilely to sit up, clutching his bleeding leg and shattered nose. His eyes, when they focused on her, were filled with a mixture of pain, hatred, and disbelief. Who the hell are you?" he rasped through swollen lips, blood dripping onto his leather vest. Maya looked down at him, her face unreadable. "Just someone who wanted to buy gas," she said quietly. She used the rest of her cordage to bind his hands, ignoring his curses and threats. She took his keys and wallet. His revolver was already secured. With all 4 bikers accounted for and neutralized, she climbed out of the rock cluster and started the long, weary trek back towards the oasis gas and grub. The walk felt endless. Every muscle ached. Thirst clawed at her throat. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by fatigue and the dull throb of bruises she hadn't even realized she'd sustained. As she neared the gas station, the scene came into view. Her Mustang was still there, thank God. But it bore the scars of Tank's initial frustration. A spiderweb crack marred the passenger side window, and a long, deep scratch ran along the driver's side door, courtesy of the drop chain. Anger flared briefly, but she pushed it down. It was reparable. She was alive. The bikers' Harleys were still parked haphazardly where they'd left them. The lights inside the diner were on, casting a yellow glow onto the gravel lot. The beat-up pickup truck was gone. She approached cautiously, .357 drawn again, scanning the windows. She saw the woman from behind the counter peering out nervously. When she saw Maya, alone and seemingly unharmed, her eyes widened. Maya gave a slight nod, trying to project reassurance, and walked towards the diner door. She needed water, needed to use a landline if they had one. She pushed the door open. The woman, her name tag read Martha, stood behind the counter, clutching a heavy-duty rolling pin like a weapon. The 2 old-timers were still in their booth, looking pale but resolute, one holding a tire iron. They gone?" Martha asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They're detained," Maya said carefully. "They won't be bothering anyone for a while. Is there a phone I can use?" "A landline." Martha nodded wordlessly, pointing towards an old wall-mounted phone near the cash register. "And water?" Maya asked, her throat raw. One of the old-timers pushed a glass of water across the counter towards her. Drank this, girl? You look like you wrestled a whirlwind. Maya gratefully downed the water in one go. Something like that, she managed. She picked up the phone receiver. The dial tone was a welcome sound. She didn't call 911. She didn't call the county sheriff. She paused, thinking, who to call? This situation was complicated. Assault, attempted kidnapping, discharge of firearms, potential MC criminal activity. It needed careful handling. She dialed a number memorized years ago, a secure line reserved for emergencies connecting to a specific department within Naval Special Warfare Command. It wasn't for reporting biker brawls, but it was her only guaranteed secure line to people who could understand the nuances and provide the right kind of support without escalating things locally in unpredictable ways. After a series of electronic clicks and transfers, a calm, professional voice answered, devoid of identification. Go ahead. This is Lieutenant Commander Jensen, operative call sign Valkyrie, Maya said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Requesting assistance. I'm stateside, Arizona, civilian status, leave? I've been involved in a hostile civilian encounter. Multiple assailants, members of the Desert Vipers motorcycle club, neutralized and detained. Firearms discharged. Requesting liaison with appropriate federal authorities and secure transport. My current location is... She gave the name of the gas station and the highway number. There was a pause on the other end, then, acknowledged, Valkyrie. Stand by. Help is on the way. Maintain situational awareness. Estimate ETA 2 hours. Can you secure the location until then? Affirmative, Maya replied. Location secure. For detainees, non-lethal takedowns, some injuries require medical attention. My vehicle is operational but sustained minor damage. No friendly casualties. Understood. Sit tight. We'll handle it from here. The line clicked dead. Maya hung up the phone, a wave of relief washing over her. Help was coming. The right kind of help. Now she just had to wait. She turned back to Martha and the old-timers who were watching her with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Who are you? Martha asked again, echoing Razor's earlier question. Maya managed a small, tired smile. Just a tourist, she said. Passing through. She leaned against the counter, the borrowed .357 still tucked reassuringly in her waistband. 2 hours. It felt like a lifetime, but she could wait. The desert night was falling, bringing a cool breeze, and for the first time since the Harleys roared into the lot, Maya allowed herself to believe she might actually get to see her grandfather soon. But as she looked out the window into the deepening twilight, a flicker of movement caught her eye far down the highway, heading towards Redemption. Headlights. Not just one pair, but several. And they weren't moving like civilian traffic. They were spaced out, moving fast, purposefully. Her hand instinctively went back to the revolver. Were they Viper's reinforcements? Or something else entirely? The 2 hours promised by her contact suddenly felt very, very far away. The desert, it seemed, wasn't quite done with her yet. Maya has neutralized the immediate threat and called for backup, but unidentified vehicles are approaching rapidly, suggesting the danger might not be over, potentially escalating into a larger confrontation before official help arrives. Part 5, Shadows and Sirens. The approaching headlights grew steadily brighter, resolving into 3 distinct sets. They weren't bikes, they looked like trucks or SUVs, dark shapes barreling down the lonely highway. Maya watched them, her fatigue momentarily forgotten, replaced by renewed tension. The Vipers were a local chapter, maybe 50 strong according to online whispers she'd vaguely registered once. Did Razor manage a call before she took his phone? Did they have scouts out? Or was this unrelated? In this isolation, coincidence felt unlikely. Martha, Maya said quietly, her eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles. Those old-timers. Can they handle themselves? Martha glanced at the men in the booth. Jedediah, thin and wiry, spat into a spittoon. Caleb, broader, rested the tire iron across his lap. Jed was a tail gunner in Korea, Martha said softly. Caleb ran security at the old copper mine till it shut. They ain't spring chickens, but they ain't helpless. Good, Maya nodded. Stay away from the windows. Keep the lights as they are. Nobody comes in or out. She moved towards the door, cracking it slightly, peering out into the twilight. The vehicles were closer now, maybe half a mile away. Definitely SUVs, dark-colored, moving in loose formation. No markings she could see. Not police cruisers. Not the heavy-duty trucks used by ranchers. Her mind raced. Federal response couldn't possibly be here this fast. Unless her call triggered an existing alert? Was this area already under surveillance for Viper activity? Were these feds already in the vicinity? Or was it something worse, rival gang? Cartel affiliates the Vipers might be mixed up with? The SUVs slowed as they approached the gas station, turning into the lot, their headlights sweeping across the dusty pumps and Maya's scarred Mustang. They parked strategically, blocking the highway exits just as the bikers had done hours earlier, engines idling, creating a perimeter. 3 black, nondescript SUVs. Tinted windows. Maya eased the door shut, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against her ribs. This felt professional. Coordinated. More dangerous, perhaps, than the bikers themselves. Trouble? Jedediah asked, his voice raspy but steady. Maybe, Maya replied, moving away from the door, positioning herself deeper inside the diner, using the end of the counter as cover. She kept the .357 ready. Just stay put. Doors opened on the SUVs. Figures emerged. 6 of them. Dressed not in biker leather, but in practical, dark clothing. Tactical pants, boots, jackets despite the evening warmth. They moved with crisp efficiency, fanning out, scanning the area. No visible weapons, but their posture screamed trained personnel. One figure, taller than the rest, detached from the group and walked towards the diner door. He moved with confidence, not aggression. He stopped just outside the glass door, hands visible, empty. Lieutenant Commander Jensen? His voice was calm, clear, easily audible through the door. I'm Special Agent Thorne, FBI. We intercepted a distress signal flag to your identifier. Are you secure? Maya felt a rush of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. FBI. Not reinforcements for the Vipers. Not cartel. Her call had triggered something local. They must have been closer than her NSW contact realized. She took a breath, composing herself. Agent Thorne, she called back, keeping her weapon ready but lowering the immediate tension in her stance. Affirmative, location is secure. For assailants detained, non-lethal. Require medical evacuation for 2, possibly 3. My vehicle is damaged but functional. Understood, Commander, Thorne replied. We have EMS stage down the road. Can you open the door? Maya hesitated for only a second. His approach was correct. He identified himself, stated his purpose, referenced her call. It felt legitimate. She unlocked and opened the door. Agent Thorne stepped inside, followed by another agent. Thorne was maybe late 40s, sharp eyes, salt and pepper hair, carried himself with authority. His partner was younger, watchful. Both wore badges clipped to their belts, now clearly visible. We've been running surveillance on the Desert Vipers for months, Thorne explained, his eyes quickly taking in the scene. Martha behind the counter, the old-timers, Maya looking exhausted but alert. Suspected drug and weapons trafficking. Your encounter seems to have accelerated our timeline. They objected to my presence, Maya said dryly. Things escalated. So I gather, Thorne nodded towards the revolver Maya still held. We'll take custody of the detainees and secure the scene. My team will collect your statement. We appreciate your cooperation, Commander. They're located in the desert east of here, Maya explained, giving Thorne precise directions to the wash and the rock cluster where she'd left the Vipers. 1 in the wash, gagged and bound. 1 near the edge of the wash, unconscious, head trauma and possible liver injury. 2 in a rock formation further east. 1 with a gunshot wound to the thigh, facial injuries, conscious. The last 1 bound, unharmed. She handed over the keys and burner phone she'd taken from Grime and Razor. These might be useful. Thorne took them, nodding to his partner, who relayed the information via a small radio earpiece. Teams are moving to secure the detainees now. EMS is en route to their location. He looked back at Maya. You handled yourself well, Commander. Very well. Training, Maya said simply. Over the next hour, the Oasis gas and grub transformed into a federal crime scene. More agents arrived. Yellow tape went up around the perimeter. Statements were taken from Maya, from Martha, from Jedediah, and Caleb. Maya gave a concise, factual account, omitting only the specific NSW contact details, simply stating she had requested assistance through appropriate channels. EMS arrived and departed towards the locations Maya had indicated. Forensics teams began documenting the scene at the gas station, collecting the spent casings, photographing the Mustang's damage, bagging Grimes' knife. Through it all, Maya felt a strange sense of detachment. The adrenaline crash left her feeling hollow, weary to her bones. The quiet leave she'd craved had imploded spectacularly. She answered questions automatically, her mind already drifting towards Silas, hoping the commotion hadn't somehow reached him. Agent Thorne approached her again as the activity began to wind down. Your vehicle is part of the crime scene for now, Commander. We can arrange transport for you. Maya shook her head. Thank you, Agent, but I need to get to my grandfather's ranch. It's not far, but it's remote. Can I retrieve my personal belongings from the car? Thorne considered it. Technically, it's evidence, but given the circumstances. He nodded to another agent. Escort Commander Jensen to her vehicle. Bag anything she removes. Under the watchful eye of an agent, Maya retrieved her duffel bag from the Mustang's trunk and the locked case containing her personal sidearm, a standard Sig Sauer P226. She showed the locked case to the agent, who noted it down. How are you getting to the ranch? Thorne asked. I'll walk if I have to, Maya said, hoisting the duffel bag. It wasn't that far, maybe 5 or 6 miles overland, but after the day she'd had, it felt like 100. Thorne sighed. Against regulations, but... Agent Miller, he called to the younger agent who had first entered the diner with him. Give Commander Jensen a ride to her destination. Local transport, non-official capacity. Maintain radio contact. Miller nodded. Yes, sir. Maya felt a flicker of gratitude. Thank you, Agent Thorne. Thank you, Commander. You likely disrupted a significant criminal operation today. We owe you one. He gave her a crisp nod. We'll be in touch regarding your vehicle and the follow-up. Maya followed Agent Miller to one of the black SUVs. Riding in the passenger seat, watching the familiar desert landscape slide by in the darkness felt surreal. Miller was professional, quiet, respecting her silence. As they bumped along the unpaved track leading to Silas's ranch house, Maya saw a light burning in the window. Her heart clenched. Had he been worried? Miller pulled up near the porch, cutting the engine. This is it, Maya confirmed. Thank you, Agent. Good luck, Commander. Miller waited until she was safely on the porch before backing the SUV out and heading back towards the main road. Maya pushed open the screen door, the familiar squeak echoing in the quiet night. The house smelled of old wood, dust, and the faint scent of the liniment Silas used. Grandpa, she called softly. Silas was sitting in his worn armchair, a patchwork quilt over his knees, a book lying open on the side table. He looked impossibly frail, his skin like parchment stretched thin over sharp bones. But his eyes, when they found hers, were still sharp, alert. Maya girl, he said, his voice thin but clear. Took you long enough? Started to think you got lost. Maya crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, taking his thin, cool hand in hers. Had a bit of car trouble back in Redemption, she said, keeping her voice light. Silas studied her face, his gaze lingering on the faint scratch on her cheek, the dust smudged on her clothes, the weariness in her eyes that she couldn't quite hide. He'd seen that look before, decades ago, when her father came home from his own wars. Must have been some car trouble, he said quietly. He squeezed her hand gently. You okay? Maya leaned her head against the arm of his chair, the familiar scent of home washing over her, finally letting the tension drain away completely. Yeah, Grandpa, she whispered, closing her eyes. I'm okay now. The desert outside was silent, the stars brilliant in the moonless sky. The Vipers were neutralized, the FBI were handling the fallout. She was safe. She was here. But as she sat there, listening to the rhythmic rasp of her grandfather's breathing, she knew something had shifted. The peace she sought had been violently interrupted, forcing her warrior self back to the surface in the one place she'd hoped to leave it behind. The incident at the Oasis Gas and Grub wasn't just a random encounter, it was a stark reminder that the skills honed in distant battlefields could be needed anywhere, anytime. Her leave wasn't ruined, she decided. It was just different. Maybe the quiet she needed wasn't about switching off, but about reconciling the different parts of herself, the granddaughter, the warrior, the woman seeking peace in a world that often refused to grant it. The desert hadn't given her the peace she expected, but perhaps it had offered something else, clarity. And the fight, she suspected, wasn't truly over. The Vipers had roots, connections. Taking down 4 members and drawing federal attention wouldn't sit well with the rest of the MC. Redemption, Arizona. The name felt ironic. There had been no redemption here today, only reckoning. And Maya had a feeling the echoes of this day would ripple outwards, perhaps reaching further than she could yet imagine. The bloom in the desert had shown its thorns,